The question is a simple one. Was the Cleveland torso murderer just America's version of Jack the Ripper? It's a catchy headline. It connects a familiar horror with a forgotten one. And on the surface, it makes sense. Both were phantom killers. They haunted their cities. They were never caught. They left behind a legacy of fear and a string of butchered bodies. For decades, when people wanted to describe the horror that gripped Cleveland in the 1930s, they reached for the London comparison. The Mad Butcher of Kingsbury Run became America's Jack the Ripper. But it's not that simple. The label is easy, but it's also lazy. It papers over the cracks, it ignores the unique terror of what happened in Cleveland. The Ripper stalked the foggy, gaslit alleys of Victorian London. The Mad Butcher haunted the sun-scorched, Depression-era wasteland of an American industrial city. They were both monsters, yes. But they were different kinds of monsters, born from different kinds of darkness. To understand one, you first have to understand the other. And when you put them side by side, you see that the neat and tidy comparison falls apart. What happened in Cleveland wasn't a copy. It was its own special kind of nightmare. Let's start in London. The year is 1888. The place is Whitechapel. It's a pit. A maze of narrow, dark streets slick with rain and filth. Poverty isn't just a condition here, it's the air you breathe. Thousands of people are crammed into squalid lodging houses, sleeping 10 to a room for a few pennies a night. There's no work, no hope. For many women, the only way to earn those few pennies for a bed and a bit of gin is to sell their bodies on the street. They were the poorest of the poor, the most vulnerable people in a city that didn't care about them. And that's who Jack the Ripper chose as his victims. His reign of terror was short, but it was explosive. It lasted just a few months, from August to November of 1888. In that time, he killed at least 5 women. They are known as the canonical 5: Mary Ann Nichols, Annie Chapman, Elizabeth Stride, Catherine Eddowes, and Mary Jane Kelly. The pattern was horribly consistent. He met them on the street, he slit their throats, almost severing their heads. Then, as they lay dying or dead in the dark, he went to work. He mutilated them. He sliced them open, pulled out their organs, and sometimes took them with him. The attacks were savage. They felt frenzied, full of rage. With Mary Jane Kelly, the last and most gruesome victim, the killer had time. Well, he butchered her in her own small room, not in a dark alley. He spent hours. The scene was so horrific that seasoned police officers were sick. He had carved her up beyond recognition. Her organs were placed around the room. Parts of her were gone. It was a vision of hell. The police were helpless. This was before forensics as we know it. There was no fingerprinting, no DNA. They relied on eyewitness accounts, and in the dark, confusing streets of Whitechapel, those were worthless. The killer was a ghost. He slipped in, did his work, and vanished back into the fog. The city panicked. Newspapers stoked the fire, printing sensational headlines and gruesome details. And then the letters started arriving. One, sent to a news agency, was signed with a new, terrifying name, Jack the Ripper. Whether the killer actually wrote, it doesn't matter. The name stuck. It gave the faceless terror a personality. He wasn't just a murderer, he was Jack, a taunting, theatrical villain. The killings stopped as suddenly as they started. After Mary Jane Kelly, there were no more. The Ripper was gone. He was never identified. He was never arrested. He just faded back into the shadows, leaving behind a legend that has lasted for more than a century. The Ripper myth is built on this foundation: a shadowy figure, a blade in the dark, a hatred of women, and the gaslit gloom of Victorian London. He was a product of his time and his place. Now fast forward almost 50 years. You cross the Atlantic Ocean, the city is Cleveland, Ohio, the time is the mid-1930s, the height of the Great Depression. The dream of American industry is dead. Factories are closed. Men who once built cars and steel now have nothing. They drift, they ride the rails, they end up in places like Cleveland's Kingsbury Run. And Kingsbury Run wasn't a neighborhood, it was a scar. A dry riverbed that cut through the city, filled with railroad tracks, garbage dumps, and hobo jungles. Shanty towns made of scrap wood and cardboard clung to the edges of the ravine. This was where the city's forgotten people ended up. Drifters, alcoholics, prostitutes, the mentally ill, and the desperately poor. They lived in shacks called hoboheims, hidden from the rest of the city. Like Whitechapel, it was a place of extreme poverty and despair. But this was a different kind of darkness. It wasn't the darkness of fog and gaslight. It was the harsh, bleak darkness of industrial collapse under the American sun. This was the Mad Butcher's hunting ground. His first official victim was found in September 1935. 2 boys, playing near Jackass Hill in Kingsbury Run, found the naked lower half of a man's torso. The upper half was found nearby. The head was missing. The man had been expertly decapitated and dismembered. His body had been drained of blood. The killer had even castrated him. The victim was eventually identified as Edward Andrassy, a small-time hood and drifter. This was the beginning. Over the next 3 years, more bodies and body parts turned up. At least 12 victims are officially attributed to the killer. The true number might be higher. What set these murders apart was the sheer cold precision of the work. This was not the frenzied slashing of Jack the Ripper. This was dissection. The victims were both men and women. That's the first major difference. The Ripper targeted one type of victim. The Butcher was an equal opportunity killer. His victims were a mix of society's outcasts. Most were never even identified. They were just John and Jane Does, their pasts erased, their names unknown. They were people nobody would miss. The killer's method was chillingly consistent. He beheaded every single one of his victims. He would then dismember their bodies, cutting the torso in half and chopping off the arms and legs. The cuts were clean, showing a deep understanding of human anatomy. This wasn't a man hacking at a body with a knife. This was someone who knew where the joints were, who knew how to separate bone and muscle with skill. The bodies were often washed clean of blood before being dumped. Sometimes the heads were found. Sometimes they never were. The head of one female victim, known as victim number 4, was found wrapped in paper. Her face had been scrubbed clean. Her hair was neat. It was a terrifying, almost respectful gesture from a monster. Unlike the Ripper, who killed and mutilated his victims on the spot, the Cleveland killer almost certainly had a lair. A secret place where he could take his victims. A murder lab. There, he had the time and the tools to do his work undisturbed. He could drain the blood, perform his dissections, and then dispose of the pieces at his leisure. This suggests a different kind of killer. Not an impulsive, raging lunatic, but an organized, methodical, patient predator. He was in complete control. The investigation fell to one of the most famous lawmen in America, Eliot Ness. Ness was the man who had brought down Al Capone in Chicago. He was now Cleveland's public safety director. He was a modern crime fighter, a symbol of incorruptible justice. But the torso murderer was not a gangster. He was something else entirely. Ness and the Cleveland police were stunned. The city was terrified. Every time a new burlap sack was found containing a piece of a human being, a new wave of panic swept through Cleveland. The newspapers called him the Mad Butcher of Kingsbury Run. He was a faceless boogeyman, a human butcher who lived among them. But unlike Jack the Ripper, he never sent any letters. He never gave himself a name. He remained silent, communicating only through his horrific work. His silence made him even more terrifying. He wasn't a showman, he was just a killer. Ness was under immense pressure. The city wanted answers. The killer was making a fool of him. In a desperate and controversial move, Ness ordered his men to raid Kingsbury Run. In August 1938, police descended on the shanty towns. They rounded up hundreds of vagrants for questioning, and then, in an act of brute force, they set fire to the Hobaheims. They burned the entire shanty town to the ground, hoping to destroy the killer's hunting ground, or maybe even the killer himself. After the raid, the official killings stopped. It's a chilling thought. Did Ness's drastic action actually work? Did he chase the killer out of town, or did the killer simply decide he was done? We'll never know. Like the Ripper, the Mad Butcher of Kingsbury Run was never caught, because he vanished. So let's put them side by side. The Ripper and the Butcher. Is the comparison fair? The similarities are obvious. Both were serial killers who were never brought to justice. Both preyed on the vulnerable and forgotten members of society. Both held a major city in the grip of terror. Both became dark legends. In that sense, yes, the Butcher was America's Jack the Ripper. He filled the same role in the national psyche, the ultimate unsolved murder mystery, the monster who got away. But the differences are far more significant. They reveal two completely different predators. First, the victims. Jack the Ripper exclusively killed female prostitutes. His motive, whatever it was deeply tied to gender and sexuality. He was a misogynist killer. The Mad Butcher killed both men and women. His victims were a more random assortment of outcasts. This suggests his motive was different. It wasn't about sex or a hatred of women. It was about something else. Maybe it was about the act of dissection itself. The thrill of taking a human body apart. Second, the method. The Ripper's murders were quick, violent, and chaotic. He attacked in public, in dark alleys and courtyards. His mutilations were savage, a storm of knife thrusts. The Butcher's work was the opposite. It was cold, clean, and methodical. He killed in private. His dismemberments were precise and skillful, more like surgery than slaughter. The Ripper seems to have been driven by a hot, explosive rage. The Butcher seems to have been driven by a cold, detached curiosity. He wasn't destroying the body so much as he was deconstructing it. This points to a fundamental difference in their psychology. The Ripper was likely a disorganized killer, acting on impulse. He was a creature of the night, striking when the opportunity arose. The Butcher was highly organized. He planned his kills, he had a secure location, he had the knowledge and the tools to do what he did. He was a disciplined monster. He was not a madman in the traditional sense. His work showed a terrifying amount of sanity and control. Then there's the context. The Ripper is a Victorian Gothic horror story. He is inseparable from the fog, the gaslight, and the poverty of 19th century London. He represents the hidden darkness beneath the surface of a supposedly civilized empire. The Butcher is a modern American horror story. He is a product of the Great Depression, of industrial decay, and social collapse. He represents a different kind of darkness, the nihilism and anonymity of the modern world, where a person could disappear from a shantytown and no one would even notice they were gone. Even the investigations highlight the differences. The Ripper case was a product of its time, a pre-forensic mystery solved by pounding the pavement and hoping for a lucky break. The Butcher case was tackled by a modern police force led by a celebrity crime fighter. Eliot Ness brought all the resources of a 20th century city to bear on the problem, and he still failed. The Butcher was so good at what he did that he outsmarted one of America's best. And what about suspects? The Ripper case has dozens of them, from doctors to painters to Polish immigrants. None of them can be proven. The Butcher case has one primary suspect, a man who Eliot Ness himself was convinced was the killer. His name was Dr. Francis Sweeney. Sweeney was a fascinating and disturbing figure. He was a brilliant doctor and surgeon who had served in the medical unit during World War I, where he conducted amputations on the battlefield. He had the surgical skills, he came from a prominent family, but he was also a heavy drinker and was known to have a dark side. His life was falling apart in the 1930s, his practice was failing, his marriage was over. He was an alcoholic prone to blackouts and strange behavior, and he knew Eliot Ness. Sweeney's cousin was a political rival of Ness's. Ness even personally interviewed Sweeney as part of the investigation. He found Sweeney to be evasive and arrogant. After their meeting, Sweeney began to taunt Ness. He would send him harassing postcards, mocking him and the police for their inability to catch the killer. Ness became obsessed. He believed Sweeney was his man. Sweeney was subjected to a polygraph test, or a lie detector, which was new technology at the time. The man who administered the test told Ness that Sweeney was the most guilty man he had ever tested, but there was no physical evidence to link Sweeney to the crimes. He was too smart for that. A secret, informal interrogation was arranged. Ness confronted Sweeney, but Sweeney just toyed with him. He was too intelligent to be trapped. Ness knew he could never get a conviction in court. The evidence was all circumstantial, so he made a deal. Shortly after the harassment started, Sweeney voluntarily committed himself to a mental institution. He spent the rest of his life in veterans' hospitals, a brilliant mind lost to alcohol and madness. Ness was convinced he had gotten his man off the streets even if he couldn't put him in jail. The official murders stopped right around the time Sweeney was institutionalized. From his hospital room, he continued to send taunting letters and postcards to Ness and his family for years, until his death in 1964. There was another suspect, a bricklayer named Frank Dolezal, who was arrested in 1939 for the murder of one of the victims. He confessed to the crime, but many believe the confession was beaten out of him by the police, who were desperate to close the case. Dolezal was found dead in his cell a few weeks later. He had hanged himself. He had 6 broken ribs. The official ruling was suicide. Many, including the county sheriff, believed he was murdered to cover up a forced confession. Dolezal's confession contradicted the known facts of the case. Most experts today believe he was innocent. But the shadow of Dr. Sweeney hangs over the case. A brilliant alcoholic surgeon with a dark side who had the skills, the opportunity, and the twisted personality to be the Butcher. He is a far more tangible and terrifying suspect than any of the phantom figures proposed in the Ripper case. He wasn't some unknown ghoul in the fog. He was a respected member of the community, a man of medicine who used his healing knowledge to destroy. So, we come back to the original question. Was the Cleveland torso murderer America's Jack the Ripper? The answer has to be no. The label is a convenience, a way to frame an unfamiliar horror in familiar terms. But it's a disservice to the reality of what happened in Cleveland. Jack the Ripper was a theater of cruelty. He was a sensation. He named himself. He was a character in a story. His horror was immediate, hot, and bloody. He was a monster from a fairy tale. The Mad Butcher of Kingsbury Run was something colder. More modern, more terrifying. He was anonymous, he was silent, his horror was clinical and detached. He wasn't just killing people, he was turning them into objects, into biological puzzles, to be taken apart. He was the killer as a technician. He represents a uniquely American kind of horror, the cold, efficient, and anonymous violence of a society that has broken down. He was a ghost in the machine of a failed industrial city. The Ripper haunts our imagination because he is a mystery wrapped in Victorian fog. The Butcher haunts us because he feels so much more real. We can almost see him, a man with a steady hand and a dead heart, working under a single bare bulb in a hidden room, meticulously deconstructing a human body while the rest of the city starves. He wasn't America's Jack the Ripper, he was himself, and that is far more frightening.